welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy. This week on the show, I am so excited to have Signe Myers Hovem on. She is the author of The Space in Between. Here, I'm reaching for it. An Empaths Field Guide. And I so very much enjoyed this book. Welcome to the show, Signe.
Thank you for having me, Paula. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, and you, of course, have written this amazing book, The Space in Between, an Empaths Field Guide. What brought you to, I guess, writing that, or what in your own background brought you to writing this book?
I'm glad you asked that because I'm a spiritual counselor, and I started in 2003 in Houston. And as a spiritual counselor, I also did energy work. I worked in the nature of consciousness and helping people kind of come back to themselves. And what I found increasingly was, and this was, just after Dr. Elaine Aron wrote and, popularized the term highly sensitive person. Mm-hmm. There were books coming out about HSPs. And then, so suddenly you were seeing in mainstream media conversations about sensitive and empathic people. And in particular, I was on a lunch break at a grocery store, and there was an Oprah magazine with an article on the front cover as a subtitle called Beware of the Sponge People. And I was really curious about this. One, I was excited that something of this topic was on a mainstream media cover, but I was curious about the title choice, Beware. It kind of sounded alarming. Mm-hmm. So I read the book. I read the article, and it had a lot of good advice, but a lot of it centered around the idea of protection. And I know that Harry Potter was coming out around that time, so maybe the publisher was capitalizing on some of that language, but they would have subtitles like, the dark arts, and it made it very fear-based. And as I read this, I realized that the person, or maybe the audience even, didn't quite understand what empathic sensitivities are, mm-hmm. And what are the mechanics of it. And I'm a very practical person in the sense that I want to re-engineer something to understand it. I want to understand its function. I want to understand its purpose. And for me, I knew I was empathic. I knew I'm, highly sensitive as well. I knew you could be both things, but none of the information I was reading out there wasn't really spending much time on the empathic part. It was more about, hallelujah, we have a label HSP, and let's just focus on that. So come fast forward, 25 years or so from then, and I think there's enough consensus that this umbrella of one label of highly sensitive, it's not one size fit all. Right. And the people who are empathic are suddenly feeling maybe like it doesn't completely explain their sensitivities. And so that was really kind of my starting point of, let me be a guide. Let me help demystify this, because in knowledge is power. And when you can understand something, it's so much easier to relate to it and to conceptualize it. Mm-hmm. But when we have an unknown, and you have a lot of like media or, you have other people, authorities, cultural authorities, trying to define it without any direct experience of it itself, it creates a lot of fear, and it creates a lot of, the misperception of powers. And so that was really kind of how I came into writing about this.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because I know, even kind of in my own journey, I feel like I probably am a highly sensitive person, and, and lean into being a functional empath if I can, of how much do we say yes to it? Because then what happens when you open the door? Because you're not sure what's going to happen. And so I think it's interesting that what you're saying is like popular media started covering it as something fearful and dark arts, because I think we're all a little bit nervous about what's on the other side of it if we say yes. And so I think it's interesting that that's the thing that you maybe are trying to help with a little bit or a lot in this book. And I think the title, even when it came across for me, I was like, yes, like I need this. We need this.
Well, and I want to go back to something you said. You said, being a bit afraid of saying yes to it. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying yes to is actually the most authentic part of you. Mm-hmm. Because, this is one of the things I wanted to, kind of communicate to people is that your higher sensory reception is hardwired into your nervous system. And I went through a period where I kind of was, separation consciousness. There's the energetic and there's the physical. There's my intuition. There's my instincts. And almost thinking that there was a whole separate sort of mysterious way that I was receiving information from the environment. When in fact, they're not doing a timeshare, they are both part of your nervous system. Yeah. And saying yes to it, there may be some moments where you don't feel completely, you understand everything going on, but that is part of life. I mean, experiencing something and then processing it or having a perception about it is partly how we even develop empathy. So with each new thing, you get to collectively enhance and upgrade your own consciousness and your own awareness of what it means to be in a body and, in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, I mean, even just as you're saying that, like, we probably kind of close that side off because it does get labeled as something else. But I mean, animals for sure are reacting to things. I mean, I would guess like, in migration or whatever, like, how do these things come about? It can't just be because they tell each other to do it or whatever. Like there's a connection there between an environment and signals that they understand that, I mean, I'm not picking up on, or maybe I am, and I'm just not recognizing them.
Or you're picking them up and you're dismissing them, because that was one of the things I say as a distinction between an HSP and an empathic person is an empathic person will entertain was at my imagination more times than not when they feel something. Whereas a highly sensitive person is more or less dealing with a sensory processing, and so they're not questioning or they're not doubting themselves. And so that's why I think it's important for people to really know the source of their sensitivities, because, the HSP has a pretty solid therapeutic environment they can go to for support, whereas a clairsentient or an empathic person really needs to work with their intuition, developing trust, learning about their energetic body, because, the empathic part is the energetic part. So we have our five senses in the physical realm, and Plato was the one who defined this, and that's over 2,000 years ago. And so you can see people who are primarily only living their life through the five senses of the physical realm. But then you have, the other end of that is the intuitive senses. That, is the energetic realm. And so intuition is really your ability to read energy. And that's that sense we get when we go in a room or we meet a person or we have a premonition. It's not like some mysterious thing has, visited you. It is your own energy body intercepting messages or information and bringing it to you through your body or through your emotions or through your thoughts. And it's up to you to know yourself so well to know, well, what is mine and what is not.
Right. And can you explain a little bit more about what you mean about that? Do you mean in the way of like, I know you offer a couple of examples in the book. One is touching somebody's hand as they hand you back a passport. Is that kind of understanding what energy is yours versus that person's, or
knowing you have to turn inward. I kind of I say this in several ways, but I say if you identify as an empath, you're on a spiritual path. And what I mean by that is your senses and trying to master, not manage or control, but to master your own sensory perception and your intuition is, it's affording you to go in, to ask yourself, is this mine? Meaning, did I create this thought? Is it reasonable that I would have this emotional experience right now? And to know your story so well that when you do feel your mood change or you feel suddenly a body part feel a little bit off, you can say, in pretty much real time, this isn't mine, and so you can have that awareness and not be tripped up or confused. I think, we go by the default that if we feel it, it must be ours. But as an empath, that default is going to really lead you into many years of confusion and not feeling like you belong in your own body.
Yeah, right. Because sometimes energy or things that you run into aren't yours, but you're picking up on it in a space or in the history of a home or a space, or that you've crossed paths with someone and they've brought an energy into a room and you can sense it. It's not like it's a bad meeting. It could just be this person is bringing something in with them that you're sensing. And that's kind of the difference.
Right. And I think too that, for myself, another part of my journey was, when I was aware I was empathic, and I do say there's this arc of being a overwhelmed empathic person to one that, you're a functional empath and you've accepted that this is kind of hardwired into you, and it's actually an act of service and guidance. But when I was, merely just an empath and aware that I could pick up stuff, I was always quick to assume something was wrong with somebody else.
Yeah.
Or I would project a negative, that person, or that room or that environment. And, and that's not a spiritual path, where you're looking outwardly and constantly judging and wanting to put barriers between you and that, and not instead of boundaries. And so, early on when you're not developed or you're unaware, there is this period of creating barriers to give yourself a sense of safety, but it also isolates you, and you're kind of in your own made bunker and barricaded from, having real relationships or connections.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, so the theme for season 7 here, and it seems to be really resonating with people, is about establishing intentional comfort. And I think there's that space right there where if as an empath, and maybe you're brand new to it, some of it might be that you do kind of hunker down and create that safety. But I imagine, and that's probably good for a little while.
Yeah.
Until you understand how to dive in a little deeper and work with it. But how do you, once you can tap into this, how do you create spaces or times or a break from it? Like, how do you create the intentional comfort of always feeling everything versus, also taking a break?
Well, I do feel that, or from my own experience, that you will shift out of feeling everything once you start accepting that this is part of your ability to communicate and have a conversation with the environment. It's almost like the noise gets louder and louder until it gets your attention. So there is that. And what I want to say, what really helped me come away from judging and projecting externally onto people was when I started to understand the mechanism of our empathic receptivity. Is there were several things I discovered, but one was that most of what we pick up is unprocessed emotions or thoughts from people, which means that they had no intention and they probably have no idea that their thoughts and emotions are in a space where somebody who's sensitive can pick it up. So it's not malicious. It's not intended to the person who's receiving it directly. And so you can begin to have compassion for what you pick up, because it's not directed to you. Once you realize what you may feel is not necessarily yours, it gives you the opportunity to actually just witness it. And that's a very empowered place to come from when you interact with energetic impressions.
Yeah. And there's a couple things I'm thinking of there. One, are empathetic people, highly sensitive people, more likely to be people that also feel like they kind of need to do something at first about the energy? Meaning, like, are we more likely to be rescuers and helpers and we want to smooth it over? Like, is that a thing?
Yes,
Okay.
that is. Well, you know, and I would say, you use the word empathetic, and
Oh, yeah.
I would say empathic. Empathetic is with empathy, and empathic is with empath. And there is, you know, once you kind of understand that, oh, I can pick up, this must mean I need to do something. You know, I need to go, you know, rescue. But, you know, I always liken, like, you know, if there was an accident on the side of the road and you came along, there are many things that you could do to assist. And one is simply call the 911. And that's as important as, you know, anything else. And so when you realize that you can pick up things, sometimes you don't know the origin of what you're feeling. And this is also the arc of going from being empathic to an empath, because by nature, our empathic nature, our senses in general, are passive. It's a one-way channel that comes into us that we then have to process based on our life experiences. So you smell something, you didn't go looking for a smell, it came to you. And just like, you know, empathic receptivity is also passive. You know, you may not know the origin of what you're smelling, but you could go investigate. And when you do that, you've gone into an active role. And so when you are an empathic person who has, you know, picked up something, and you are curious and you want to go engage it, you want to interact with it, you have now stepped into the realm of what I call as an empath. You know, so if you were to tell me I'm an empath, I would hope that would mean that you understand that you are intuitive and you pick up things from your environment, and you can be very intentional and ethical with what you do with that information. And that's why I part of my, I guess, soapbox in my book, and maybe you picked this up, is I do think there's right now almost an over-identification with the word empath, the label. And I would really ask anyone who is, you know, using the label empath to ask themselves, where did they hear it? What do they think it means? Does it really reflect their abilities and their awareness? And because I think if you are saying I am an empath and you're not quite to that understanding of the energetic realm, you know, you are attracting a lot of things towards you, because it's taking you at your word, you know. So, and the physical realm is about language in form. And so we courier from the energetic to the physical with language. So, you know, that's just, you know, I'm not telling people they're not empaths. I'm just, if they're overwhelmed, if they are somebody who said, oh, I'm so empathic, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do, then I would say, don't use that label then. Go back to being empathic, learn what are your emotions and your thoughts, and how are you embodying that, and how are you healing your own story. And then you have more to be available with when you get to feeling like you can engage and offer compassion.
Yeah, that's
you
powerful.
have to offer compassion first to yourself, really, truly, to be a functional empath.
Yeah. And that is super powerful. I feel like there's obviously a tie even there. I think your quote about, is it from Socrates, about the definition is the beginning of the path or whatever, that I'm totally baffled, and I'm not getting that totally right, but like the definition of something I hadn't even really like my brain is going to take a while to unpack all that, but just the idea that if we're calling ourselves something,
Mm,
then be ready for what that means, because the universe is then kind of what reverberating with that title, because
yeah.
that word has power. And so be sure you you know what you're calling yourself.
Well, and it's, you know, it's a noun, a person, place, or thing,
Mhm.
you know, whereas an empathic reception is you know, it's a verb, it's an action,
Sure.
you know, so, you know, we're all born sensitive.
Mhm.
And, you know, and for those who are empathic, you know, you're born, but it's your life's, you know, I say, you know, if you're an empath, you're on a spiritual path, and it's because your sensitivities are going to be showing up as guidance. But a lot of times people don't think of sensitivities as guidance. They think of something they have to manage, or they have to, you know, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and I went to divinity school. Like this is all this is all so good. And I feel like that's part of the path too, is understanding uh, like what you're stepping, and I mean this in a positive way, but like what you're stepping into for the fullness of your life. Um, and then also realizing that it does take a certain amount of stepping back to let yourself kind of grow into that space. Like it's like that two steps forward, one step back
Yeah.
almost as this journey goes. That's a lot of folks that listen, because I also went through a life coaching certification program. A lot of people that listen are also life coaches or in the healing arts somehow. And one of the things I appreciated in your book was that you talked about holding energy and holding space, and how they're two different things. And I had never really thought about this. I mean, I think maybe I knew it, but could you explain those two things? Because I think it's especially helpful for anyone who, what is it? Maybe even just kind of gleans energy from people and they don't know how to release it when they're working with them through maybe their own personal issues or whatever it is. Like we talk about holding space a lot, but maybe that's not actually what we mean, is what I'm gathering from your book.
You hear these terms a lot, and I'm really somebody who wants to, again, understand what does that mean energetically,
Yeah.
because everything starts energetically and manifests physically. So for me, if I hear someone talk about a term or a thing, I want to know, what does that really look like energetically? And that's why, you know, I also talk in the book about the difference between observe and witness. I like to make distinctions. And so with holding and holding space versus holding energy is that, you know, when you're holding energy, it's just that it's, you know, you have to hold something, you have to contract. You have to, you know, in a way, brace or contain something. And that's not very flowing. And it doesn't
Mhm.
allow a lot of circulation. So if you can imagine holding space being like this container that has, you can put into it whatever you need to, like a pot, a plant. You have a potted plant, it has soil, it needs this, it needs that, it needs some sun, and you look after it and you nurture it. And then you might see that it actually needs a bigger container because the size of the container is stunting its growth,
Mhm.
right? So if holding space for someone, you must be in tune to really, what does that look like for that person? And sometimes saying a prayer, or, you know, is enough, you know, because holding space takes attention, it takes commitment.
Mhm.
And sometimes if you're holding space for a client and they're not following through with doing what they need to do to like emulate all of that which is in that container, that's an off balance. You know, then it's you holding a lot of energy for a life that's actually not forming inside there. And
Yes.
I had a client once who, I didn't write this in the book. I had at one point, but it came out. And he was, he had gone to a lot of different therapists, and he was, somebody had recommended he comes to me. And I get a lot of people who are kind of, I guess, desperate, or like, let's try her. But so he had a pattern where he was very self-destructive, and he had a lot that was in his life that, kind of allowed him to think he could do that to himself. And he required for me that, he would call at, odd hours and desperate and wanting me to pray for him. And or do energy work or whatnot. And I eventually came to a point where I said to him, why are you willing to ask me to do something for you that you will not do for yourself? And, because he had taken himself so far out of the equation of his own healing, wanting other people, other techniques, therapies to do it magically for him, not realizing the only person who can process his life is himself. So when you're holding space as a person who works with other people, really be mindful of how much of that do you need to be doing. I think it's great to hold space for your practice, because that's directly related to you and what type of clients, you want in that space, or, what is the overall sensation or experience that you hope your practice provides to people.
If somebody wants to buy your amazing book, or I know you also offer courses and other things, for people, how can they find you?
Well, right now, my website is www.smhovem.com. And right now, the front page is really featuring my book. There's also an audiobook through Audible or Chirp. And I've put 3 meditations on the back of the audiobook. And if you read the physical book, there's a link there that would take you to it as well. It has subtle body clearings, and it has just a relaxation one. And then I would like to say that I do workshops in the pandemic and everything. It's kind of, all of that has been put on hold, but now that travel is opening back up, and I would hope by next summer we have a little bit more normalcy going on. And if anybody's interested in hosting one of my workshops, just reach out. Ideally, they work best if it's 10 or more people. And I also do private clients. I'm pretty busy, but you never know. If you feel inclined to work with me, then, just put in a submission on the form there.
Wonderful. And I will put the links to all that in the show notes for this episode. And of course, a link to your book. What are 3 ways that you can think of to jumpstart joy in your life, in the world, or in other people's lives?
Well, I wanted to say, I did answer a little bit. There were 2 other things. I have to say that Ted Lasso as a TV show, if you have not watched it.
I haven't, but clearly I need to.
Yeah, it just emanates joy. I have to say that, you can tell that you are in joy when you are smiling, and you don't even consciously know that you're smiling. And when I watched Ted Lasso, there were so many times that my husband and I were just beaming because it was so delightful. And I really do combine delight and joy together. It's almost like delight is a precursor to joy coming in. So yes, that's being a consumer, but it really enlivened us. And also, this is something you'd have to go investigate. But radiant circuits are a part of your energy system. And Donna Eden, who is a fairly well-known energy institution, actually, it's called the Eden Method, but she provides so much free content on YouTube. And there's so many different practitioners who post free videos as well. But if you look up, trace your radiant circuits, and if you committed to just give it 20 days, 30 days. And it may seem like really odd to you if you've not been aware of meridians and energy systems. But when you're tracing your energy, it's just with your hands, because, you're electromagnetic. And so they go through it. Their videos are usually no longer than 12 minutes. And all it is it's kind of like you would think somebody was doing Qigong or Tai Chi, but it's just using your body and tracing these radiant circuits. And radiant circuits really help bring in joy, especially if you are in the drudgery of life, if you find that even joyful, happy people annoy you because, that can happen. You can be so miserable that seeing other people's happiness actually is a turnoff. And so if you are like annoyed initially when you're watching this, because Donna Eden is very joyful, that's kind of an indicator that your vibratory rate is pretty low. And so just go with it, and I would love to know if you put 20 days, 30 days, just tracing your radiant circuits, what is the outcome at the end of the month?
Amazing. I have not heard of this, so I'm going to go look it up and I'll link it up for everybody. I'm really excited to try it because I love energy work and I'm pretty new to any of it. So thank you very much for suggesting it. Yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to add as we close this out, Signe?
No, but this has been a really enjoyable conversation. And I just hope that your listeners, if they are sensitive, that they will find the source of their sensitivities. And if they need support, that they seek out, the appropriate forum for that, whether it's for intuitive, energetic awareness, or if it's about highly sensitive issues, just know that right now in this time and age, there is so much opening up, and you're opening up, and you're probably feeling a lot of what's going on energetically in the mass consciousness. So be tender with yourself. Know that everyone else that you may be feeling, they're a bit overwhelmed, but you don't have to identify with it. Know who you are and be such. You can feel somebody else being overwhelmed, but it doesn't mean you have to be overwhelmed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a delight.
Thank you.
Yay.